Qin Shi Huang. The most lasting part of Huang's rule was not his cruelty, but what his cruelty made possible. By the time he unified China, rule through fear was already established. Punishment was severe, dissent was crushed, and obedience mattered more than debate. Violence enforced compliance, and the state moved quickly because it allowed no resistance. That part of his rule is well known, and it did not last long. What lasted was the machinery built underneath it. Without knowing, China gained permanent standardization that made long-term unity possible. You see, to govern territory that had spent centuries divided, Qin Shi Huang imposed uniform systems that removed ambiguity. Writing was standardized, so commands meant the same thing everywhere. Weights and measures were fixed, so trade, taxes, and logistics could function without dispute. Currency was unified to stabilize exchange. Laws were made identical, so enforcement stayed predictable across regions. Roads were laid out to connect the empire efficiently, not symbolically. These systems were not designed to be humane. They were designed to work, and they did. When he died, his dynasty collapsed almost immediately. Rebellions followed, and the terror faded. But the structure did not collapse with him. Later rulers abandoned the excesses of his rule while keeping the tools that made large-scale governance possible. The same writing system allowed ideas to survive across dynasties. Unified measurements kept economies compatible. Central administration reduced endless fragmentation. What began as instruments of control became the foundation of continuity. Napoleon Bonaparte. France needed order fast, and Napoleon delivered it by force. After the revolution, power kept changing hands, laws shifted by region, and courts contradicted each other. Authority existed, but predictability did not. Napoleon stepped into that gap with an iron grip. He ruled through centralized control, crushed opposition, censored the press, and treated dissent as a threat to stability. The state moved because resistance was costly. Administration became a weapon. Officials answered upward, not outward. The military enforced compliance. Politics narrowed into obedience. This was not a government built for debate. It was built to function. So, to keep that system running, rules had to stop changing. So Napoleon ordered something radical for the time. Every civil rule would be written, standardized, and applied the same way everywhere. Property ownership, contracts, marriage, inheritance, and courts were pulled into one legal framework. Judges no longer improvised based on custom. Bureaucrats no longer guessed. The law became fixed, readable, and transportable. As Napoleon's armies moved across Europe, the system moved with them. Territories conquered by force were reorganized by statute. Local privileges were erased. Legal exceptions disappeared. The empire expanded, then fractured. Coalitions formed. Defeat followed. Napoleon was removed, exiled, returned, and removed again. The wars ended. The regime collapsed. The good thing? Modern civil law survived him. The Napoleonic Code remained in place across France and spread permanently across Europe, Latin America, and parts of Africa and Asia. Equality before the law, standardized contracts, secular courts, and clear property rights did not retreat with his armies. They stayed because societies had already reorganized around them. Empires fell, but the rules kept working. Joseph Stalin. The Soviet Union survived the largest invasion in history because it had already been turned into a machine. You see, by the late 1930s, the state moved on command. Resources shifted without negotiation. Labor flowed where planners sent it. Factories rose in places chosen for distance and security, not comfort. Steel, coal, tanks, and rail lines became priorities measured in output, not lives. The system did not ask permission. It extracted. That extraction carried a brutal cost. Forced collectivization broke rural life. Famines followed. Political purges removed real and imagined enemies. Millions were imprisoned or killed. Fear enforced compliance, and speed replaced caution. The country paid for capacity in human lives long before the war began. Then, in June 1941, the invasion came. German forces tore through the Western Soviet Union at a scale never seen before. Cities fell. Armies collapsed. Losses were staggering, yet the system did not stop. Entire factories were dismantled and moved east by rail while fighting continued. Production resumed within months. Tanks rolled out faster than they were destroyed. Ammunition flowed. Supply lines held. The war turned into attrition, and attrition favored output. Soviet industry absorbed losses that would have broken a slower state. By 1943, the balance shifted. By 1945, Berlin fell. The Eastern Front consumed the bulk of Nazi military power and decided the war's outcome. The good thing? The industrial capacity built under Stalin made the defeat of Nazi Germany possible. Without that scale of production, the invasion would not have been stopped where it was or when it was. History records the cost in millions and the result in ruins and victory. Adolf Hitler. With Hitler, ideas that had circulated for decades were turned into state machinery, and the result could no longer be ignored. By the time he came to power, racial hierarchy was not fringe. Eugenics laws already existed. Universities taught race science. Governments classified people by blood, origin, and heredity. These ideas lived comfortably inside policy, paperwork, and law. Hitler did not invent them. He organized them. Once in control, the regime moved with bureaucratic precision. Identity became documentation. Discrimination became regulation. Removal became transport. Killing became an administrative process scheduled, recorded, and optimized. This was order applied to elimination. The state did not hide its logic, it scaled it. As the war expanded, so did the system. Camps multiplied, trains ran on time. Entire populations were reduced to numbers, then to absence. The machinery kept moving until it ran out of territory, resources, and enemies. By 1945, Europe was filled with evidence that could not be argued away. The collapse exposed the full cost of ideas once treated as respectable. Courts faced crimes that existing law could not name. Science faced theories that led only to extermination. Governments faced the fact that neutrality had enabled catastrophe. The good thing, though, scientific racism and eugenics were permanently discredited as legitimate systems. After the war, race biology was purged from serious science. Genocide was defined as a crime. Crimes against humanity entered international law. Human rights were written into global frameworks because their absence had been documented beyond denial. They survived for centuries and died in plain sight. Leopold II. The violence worked because no one was watching. Leopold II ran the Congo as a business, not a colony. Quotas mattered more than people. Rubber output was enforced through punishment delivered far from Europe, where distance softened responsibility. Administrators filed reports. Companies paid dividends. The system functioned quietly while villages emptied. At first, the operation stayed invisible. Death happened in forests and along rivers. Hands were cut to prove bullets were not wasted. Labor was extracted through fear. Entire regions collapsed, and the paperwork still looked clean. The empire did not need secrecy. It needed remoteness. That remoteness failed. Missionaries began sending letters, traders leaked testimony, photographs crossed borders, reformers compared numbers and asked where the people had gone. Reports piled up, names attached to injuries, statistics formed patterns. What had been dismissed as rumor became documentation. Public pressure followed evidence. Newspapers printed images. Activists organized campaigns across Europe and the United States. Governments were forced to respond to facts they could no longer deny. In 1908, control of the Congo was taken from Leopold and transferred to the Belgian state. The private empire ended under scrutiny, but modern human rights activism was born. The Congo became the first case where international outrage, investigative reporting, and coordinated pressure forced accountability across borders. Atrocities stopped being internal matters. Power learned it could be observed from afar. The damage was vast and secrecy never recovered. Al Capone. He survived because the system only knew how to answer violence with force. By the late 1920s, his power was obvious and untouched. He ran liquor routes, bought protection, and used public brutality as a signal. Murders happened openly. Everyone knew who ordered them. Nothing stuck. Raids failed, witnesses disappeared, juries hesitated. Fear did the work for him. Law enforcement chased guns and bodies while Capone hid behind structure. His operation was disciplined, cash-heavy, and carefully recorded. Violence kept rivals quiet. Money kept everything else clean. The louder his reputation grew, the harder he was to reach directly. The break came quietly. Investigators stopped treating Capone like a killer and treated him like a business. They followed ledgers instead of witnesses. Income was weighed against lifestyle. Numbers stopped lining up. Intimidation meant nothing to tax forms. In 1931, Capone went to prison for tax evasion, but from his downfall, modern financial crime enforcement was born. After Capone, governments invested in forensic accounting, tax audits, and financial surveillance as primary tools against organized crime. Criminal empires learned that silence could not erase spreadsheets. Fear protected him, but numbers ended him. J. Edgar Hoover. Centralized power moved faster than the law that was supposed to restrain it. You see, when Hoover took control of federal policing, authority flowed inward, files multiplied, surveillance expanded, information became leverage. Politicians, activists, journalists, and private citizens were cataloged while oversight lagged behind capability. The state learned to watch first and justify later. At the same time, the system hardened. Fingerprints were collected nationwide. Crime data was centralized. Forensic laboratories replaced rumor and confession. Cases crossed state lines without paralysis. Policing stopped being local and reactive and became national and procedural. That structure concentrated power. Hoover used information to intimidate rivals and silence critics. Careers ended without charges. Investigations blurred into vendettas. The tools worked too well in the hands of someone who faced no restraint. The reckoning arrived slowly. Congressional investigations exposed surveillance practices. Files surfaced. Limits were imposed after years of damage. Hoover died before consequences reached him, but unchecked authority did not survive him. But he left modern forensic policing. Policing shifted away from confessions and coercion toward documentation and proof. Procedure outlasted abuse because it worked regardless of who held power. The system learned by watching abuse. Osama bin Laden. For years, intelligence moved in pieces, and no system forced them together. Before the attacks, security ran on separation. Agencies guarded information, borders slowed cooperation, airlines prioritized speed. Threats were expected to look familiar and arrive from outside. Gaps were accepted as manageable risk. Bin Laden exploited those gaps deliberately. Planning crossed countries. Money moved quietly. Communication stayed fragmented. The attack succeeded because no single institution saw the whole picture. Warnings existed, scattered across systems that never connected. Afterward, failure became undeniable. Thousands were killed in hours. Air travel stopped. Markets froze. Governments realized the problem was not just terrorism, it was architecture. Systems built for isolation could not survive networked threats. And so because of Osama, global intelligence coordination became permanent. Information sharing became mandatory. Databases were linked. Aviation security shifted toward prevention. The world learned that separation was never protection.